And it goes to a very common mistake that students make, in my mind, in their personal statement is Ask the Dean, episode 33, live in studios in Hollywood, California.
Not.
I was just watching some videos of Price is Right, and I want to be like that announcer. Come on down. So fun. I wish I was on that show.
I know. I always love that show.
One day.
That's your dream.
One day.
That's your dream show. Yeah.
Dr. Scott Wright, how are you?
Doing well. Beautiful day here in Austin, Texas, and enjoying the Martin Luther King holiday today. So that's awesome. So I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Recorded some application renovation videos this morning, which are the videos that seem to get the most love on my YouTube channel, looking at students' applications, why they didn't get into school this application cycle. So
yeah,
had an NP who's applying for the first time after kind of a 20-year pre-medish journey. Have a pharmacist, a Canadian pharmacist.
Oh, wow.
Applying to U.S. medical schools for the first time. And another student, she's in her second application cycle, had 4 interviews last cycle, all waitlist. Has 1 interview this year already in the books and 1 more that she just got between booking the session with me. So hopefully...
yeah,
her application doesn't need any renovating, and she can do what she needs to do to get into school cycle. But I love doing those. Right, we cover the whole gamut through MedEd Media and through Mapped, with application renovation, with Am I Ready, and with Mission Accepted, to really cover the gamut. So hopefully, if you're watching this, go check out all of those videos, because you should be good to go. There's no excuses for putting an application together and submitting it, and if you don't know what the heck's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Rachel Grubbs, how are you doing?
I'm good. You're kind of pixelated, so I'll take the spotlight for a minute. Hopefully your camera will clear up shortly.
Silly StreamYard can't handle the truth.
And I'm super short, so I'm going to try to be taller in my camera. Hi, everyone. No, I'm well. I was telling Scott that after weeks of feeling groggy, I guess that, end of year low light, I seem to be starting to find some perk again. So that's exciting. It's always nice to find that inner perk.
Yeah, that is exciting.
And I'm excited today. I posted this in the Facebook group, but for folks who are watching live, we rolled out the first part of our application simulation. So if you haven't already, you can log into Mapped. And in the left sidebar, there's a new application tab. You can go there and you will see for all 3 application services options to do personal statement, personal comment. It's the same thing more or less, but one for each application service.
Yeah,
Ryan's going to show us
mine as well. So I'm on my admin account, so ignore the admin features there. But under the student, we now have applications, and we can go under AMCAS ACOMAS or TMDSAS, and we'll click on AMCAS here. And we have our personal comments, which is the technical term for personal statement, and our work and activities. So we can come in here and create a draft of our personal statement, and just start typing "Hello World," and then create my draft. And it's there for the world to see. The advisor that you invite to have access to your account will be able to see your account. And then the nice thing is they'll be able to provide feedback for you, leave comments, etc. So they can come in here and say, "This is the best essay ever." Right? This is what Dr. Scott Wright would say about all of my essays. And so we can
wait, what?
So this is just the beginning. Like we've done with everything else, we release it way before It's polished and perfect, but we want you to have access to it. It should be solid, but it could be much prettier and more featureless. But we have lots more features in the works, ready to start working on.
Yeah. We may give you guys a little bit of a style polish at some point in the coming months, but right now it's all substance all the time because we just want to get you where you want to go.
Yes.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Any other updates before we jump into questions?
No, we can go ahead and jump in.
Alrighty, let's rock and
So if you
roll.
want to start with some of the ones in the private chat, I can read them or you can.
I'll read them here.
Alrighty.
What do admissions committees think of character references? If I know someone at the medical school, such as a student, can they put in a good word for me? Dr. Scott Wright, I'm sure you loved those emails and phone calls. Hey, Dr. Wright, my son's best friend is applying to school. They're a fantastic person. You should admit them. Right.
Well, I think that, interestingly enough, I think that they're generally those things don't work very well. But I do say that there were times in my experience where, particularly if a student came up and sent me an email or came to talk to me and was, like, hey, I have a one of my friends from college is applying this year and just wanted to highlight, their application for you. And most of the time it wasn't pushy, a reference at all, but what just kind of like, hey, I just wanted to just give you a heads up on what this was, who this student was and stuff like that. Now that kind of stuff will initiate, or at least it did for me. And I think it's fairly common that it might initiate me at least looking at it and just saying, hey, who is this person? And because the student knows the school and whether or not that particular student would be, would thrive at the institution, etc. Now, I have on the reverse side of things, I had in the past student where it was the exact opposite, where it was a negative. Hey, this student is applying, and I have real concerns or real questions about their ability to do well or handle it. And again, that's not a black ball on them. Just in and of itself, but it will initiate a little bit of further review on my part to look at it and say, hey, kind of, do I see anything here? I'm not going to take their sort of opinion as gospel truth. I'm going to look at it and kind of evaluate what I think and perhaps initiate other, depending on what I think, initiate other reviews or something like that. So, I wouldn't say, move forward if you know somebody at a medical school, because, if every student in a medical school had 2 or 3 friends who would just be fantastic here, then, we would never get anything done beyond just looking at those students. And so, I don't discourage that, but I don't say don't put a whole lot of credibility in kind of what's going to happen with that.
Yeah. Well, let's expand a little bit on the negative side of things, because this is something that I brought up to you relatively recently, especially just with the political climate we're in. Mm-hmm. There was one specific pre-med student who I know of who had a very, what I would say, disappointing Twitter account, who it seemed to be tied to her. It was a classmate of hers at a post-bacc program, who knew her and knew that this was her account. That was very much conspiracy theory, very much anti-science type activity on this Twitter account. And I went to you. I said, if you had a student who was accepted to medical school like this student was, would you want to know this? And would this potentially change your mind? So for students out there who come across one of their classmates or someone they know who potentially has some character issues, some beliefs that may go against being a good physician, what do you recommend they do in that situation?
Yeah, I would say so. You know, if it's a medical student who has a friend who this, or has an acquaintance who this is, you know, kind of the MO for them, then I'd say reach out to the admissions office at your medical school and just let them know that you've become aware of some concerning information with regard to one of the applicants in that, and kind of explain to the office your concerns and how you know about this. The problem is when you get this information anonymously, and that carries no water whatsoever. You know, an anonymous tip about something, you know, it's, you know, if you're gonna make a comment about somebody, own up to it and say, hey, this is my concern. And so now we would sometimes even have anonymous sort of information come into the admissions office, either in a written letter or an email from a fake email account or whatever, saying, oh, we know you have or I know you have an applicant who is so-and-so this year, and you just need to know this about that applicant. And that kind of stuff doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Good to know. All right. Next question here. My pre-med advising office offers letter packets for students applying. Included in the packet is an autobiography written by the student. I'm assuming this is UCF because that's the only one I know who does this. Do admissions committees read these? If I choose to write one, should I have some elements of my personal statement in it, my story, etc.? Thank you. So I just know UCF does an autobiography, and from my understanding, it's only for the admissions, the pre-health office to write your committee letter. That's my understanding of what it is. It doesn't go along to the medical schools. But Scott, are you aware of these autobiographies at all?
Yeah, I have encountered this with a small number of schools over the course of my career, and the admissions offices have way too much to look at already. They're not going to look at that. Yeah. They already know what's in your application. That's standardized to every applicant. So when in the event that an admissions committee gets a letter packet that has some sort of autobiographical sketch or whatever in it, my experience is we're just going to look at the letters and disregard everything else.
My hope would be that these offices, these pre-health offices, would be open and honest to the students to say, this is going to go to the schools. Like, we're passing this on to the schools so that you know what's going or what's not going.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my experience has been that most undergraduate institutions, if they do something like this, which is pretty rare, I think, but they do let the student know, you know, what's in the packet, and, you know, that it's going to the medical schools, et cetera. So, but again, I think, you know, my opinion is, with regard to letter packets and committee letters, et cetera, do whatever your school asks you to do. And if they ask you to do an autobiographical thing, just do it. You don't want to, you know, worry about getting crosswise with your pre-med office. You don't want to worry about a medical school getting involved or whatever. Just kind of do what they ask you to do and let the medical school hash that part out.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Next question up is, do you have any advice about the CARS diagnostic tool that AAMC made? I do not.
Wow. I really don't either. I wonder if, Rachel, do you have any
I'm not aware of that specific tool. You guys can hear me, right? Yeah. But I would just say in general, anything from the AAMC is your best source.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of understood without being scientifically proven that they're not perfect either. But no practice test is perfect, and nothing's ever going to get better than something from the test writers.
Right. Right. And, you know, I think any amount of extended diagnostic assistance that you can get from with regard to CARS, or, because CARS is that section that just, I think generally speaking, confounds a lot of pre-med students, and
yeah,
they struggle on it.
Absolutely.
So.
And I gave the AAMC that feedback, years ago. I worked a little bit more closely with them when I was in MCAT prep land, because I was lucky enough to be at a company that they wanted to do some collaboration with. And that was one of the pieces of feedback I gave them, is that students cannot get enough tests and we need more CARS.
Right.
I have no idea if my feedback is part of this tool or not, but students tend to overlook CARS, or sometimes, and I'm not speaking to the specific question asker, I'm just talking generally. Sometimes people get this idea that, like, well, CARS can't be improved. And it absolutely can. It's just a very different skill than the other skills you're employing. So it's easy to think that it's not possible, when actually it's just a new challenge and a new skill set to learn.
Yeah.
But CARS will serve you not just on the MCAT, right? It's going to serve you the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend CARS prep.
Yeah, I do too.
Can I have my my weekly AAMC rant? They
Go right ahead.
You have the floor.
They continue to release new products and services where, to apply to medical school, to get through this process, you're paying the AAMC $1,000 just to get through, and way more than $1,000. I don't know. The $1,000 is just a minimum barrier to get into medical school. And they're a gatekeeper that needs to have their walls blown in so that more students can access information and knowledge and the information necessary to do well on these tests and to get into medical school. So
I agree.
They
speaking
come out with new stuff every week, every month, and it's just like they have Vita, they have the new SJT that they're going to charge for, they have this new diagnostic tool. It's just more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah, we should be figuring out ways to streamline it, not complicate it. And speaking as someone who's been, around test prep of many forms for a couple decades now, it's not just the AAMC. Educational Testing Services, which puts out the SAT and the GRE, and used to put out the GMAT before the GMAT left and joined the ACT company. They've got a long history of, like, there's a for-profit division and a nonprofit division, and the lines are kind of shady. And honestly, in the grand scheme of testing companies, the AAMC is one of the more high integrity ones, which I know is a weird thing to hear, given how frustrated everybody's been for the last year. Those of you that follow me on Twitter know that I just periodically like to reply to them and ask them when they're moving the MCAT online. But yeah, there's a lot of improvement that needs to happen around the way we give both exit and entrance exams when you're going from one stage of schooling to the next.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, end rant. Speaking of another test prep product, should I study for CASPer? So CASPer, if you don't know, it's a situational judgment type test created by Altus Assessments, which Scott and I, do we have to have disclosures? We spoke at the Altus Assessments conference in 2019.
Correct.
The Altus, the team of Altus from McMaster, the same beautiful minds that created the multiple mini interview, they just love to come up with new forms of torture. It's something that a lot of schools are using either in replacement of a secondary or in addition to a secondary, and every school is using them a little bit different in terms of how they're adding it to their admissions process. So with that said, premedyears.com/303 is an interview that I did with Dr. Kelly Dorr of Altus Assessments, one of the creators of CASPer and the MMI. Go listen to that. My personal take is that you just need to understand CASPer, and takecasper.com has a practice test on there so you can learn the layout, learn how the website works. It's something you take at home. You need to have a webcam. This is top of mind for me because I just reworked this chapter of my book because I had to add the AAMC SJT. But usually CASPer is not something you have to study for. Just kind of understand it, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think, speaking of AAMC, I think AAMC's been pissed at the CASPer
Take
people
money.
for yeah, right.
Yeah, they're like, you can't take money from our students, so we're gonna
Especially-
copy you.
Especially since you're from Canada. You're not even taking the same money.
Yeah. Ugh. All right. And last question here before we jump to live questions. I was a student athlete at UCF, and in my sophomore year, my science GPA took a huge dive. I graduated in May of 2020 and continued school with a do-it-yourself postbac to continue my upward trend. I have one semester with a 3.75 science GPA, and the following 4 semesters are all A's. This will bring my science GPA up to a 3.3, my cumulative 3.6. Considering everything else is good in my application, is this upward trend good enough? So one semester, 3.75, and the 4 following semesters, all A's, 4.0. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I mean, the questioner doesn't tell us how many hours that they were taking in those semesters, and so my assumption is there's hopefully that means they're full-time semesters, which I would recommend.
Three credits each semester.
Yeah, so I mean that's a little bit. My assumption is that they were studying full-time, but that may not be a good assumption. But I definitely think the post-bac hours are going to help. The schools are going to focus in on those post-bac GPA, and depending on what they're looking for in terms of the number of hours they want to see in a post-bac GPA to make it credible for them to work with. So the question being, considering everything else is good in my application, is this upper trend good enough? Now, it's the 2 words, good enough, and the question being good enough for what? Well, we don't really know anything about their clinical hours or shadowing or activities. We don't know anything about the MCAT. So there's a lot of holes here that we don't really know anything about in this question. If the issue is just if the question is just surrounding academic work, then it may be good enough. It sounds like 5 semesters. With some level of work at a pretty strong level. So yeah, I mean, I think probably that's good enough in terms of that part of the application.
Definitely. All right.
We got a bunch of questions here.
Yeah. Stop.
Awesome. Was that me?
No, Ryan and I were doing the simultaneous click.
Oh.
I'm going to let you produce. I'm just going to hold my hands here. My spouse is a resident dermatologist, and I'm curious how much I should discuss or avoid in telling my story. Wait, my spouse is a resident dermatologist, and I'm curious how much I should discuss or avoid in telling my story. I'm leery to make it sound like I'm just doing this because she did, but have lots of exposure to the process and physician life. Aha. So, getting to the seed. Is your seed that your spouse is a dermatologist, a resident, or did your seed happen before that and she just happens to be a dermatologist as well? Yeah. So the personal statement in my mind is a weak personal statement if you say, I want to be a physician and my exposure to medicine is I get to see what life is like through my wife or my spouse.
Yeah,
right?
that's weak. Yes.
Why did we both kind of assume that resident dermatologist equals wife?
Well, because it says
she.
she.
Yeah, it says she.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's definitely not a strong connection to say I get to see what it's like. Therefore, and it goes to a very common mistake that students make in my mind in their personal statement is, I know what medicine is like, therefore I'm ready to be a doctor. A lot of students make their personal statement argument around that fact. And it sounds like this student wants to make it around that fact a little bit too, because they say right at the end, I have lots of exposure to the process and physician life, therefore I should be a physician too, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where this is why we talk about clinical experience and shadowing, getting those experiences for yourself, because taking care of someone is different than your wife talking about taking care of someone later on. So you gotta be careful with that.
I agree with that completely. It's, I think that I don't think that you have to avoid discussing it or telling but I do think you have to tell your story, not her story, and not your story related to her story. It has to be a story that is in and of itself yours and compelling to say there is a seed here. There is a genesis to where this initial spark came from. And it wasn't just my wife. Now, if it was just your wife, if that's the reality, that you never had an interest in medicine up until the point that your wife started going through all this, then you got some building around that skeleton to do in terms of getting experience in and of yourself and, doing the work to really show the medical schools that it isn't just the fact that it's your wife, but or someone related to you, wife in this question, but you have to kind of build your own story, and it can't revolve around somebody else.
Yeah, there's not much difference between this versus a child growing up with a parent who's a physician.
Right.
You're still getting that kind of secondhand exposure, but there's still that own story that you have to build for yourself. And so just make sure that you're telling that story. And then this is just I never really thought about it until I saw how much fun she was having. And then I went and did all this other stuff.
Exactly. It's the other stuff that's important. Right.
Definitely. It's always the other stuff. All right.
All right.
I'm not doing anything, Rachel. You go. I was not close with any professors, unfortunately, in undergrad. I'm close with supervisors at my valet job, as well as managers, doctors at the hospital I work at as well. Is it okay if my letters of rec are from supervisors that can speak well of me, but nothing from educators? Thank you. I'm also shooting for 3 LORs.
Yeah, so the simple answer here is no, that's not going to work. Now, I think there's a lesson here, and what we don't know is some details about this particular questioner, about how long they've been out of school and some stuff like that could be relevant to this answer. But what I'm going to hone in on here is the very first phrase here of this question. I was not close with any professors, unfortunately, in undergrad. That is your mistake. You have to initiate contact with professors. You have to become close with them. It doesn't mean that you have to be their favorite student or whatever, but you have to get to know them, go to their office hours, stay after class, ask questions, be curious,
House.
No, don't show up to their house. Yeah, no, right. But this is the responsibility of students. To do this and to make the effort. It's harder at some institutions than it is at others. I get that. But you can't just say, oh, well, I don't know anybody, so can I just have, this person or that person that know nothing about me academically or intellectually or very little about me in those regards. And so I just don't think that works, generally speaking. I think you have to have a couple of academic letters that really address your ability in the classroom, your curiosity in learning, the things that are really academically centered. Because you have to keep in mind, medical school is school, just like undergrad was school. Med school is school, and so what you want is somebody or a couple of people to address. How are you as a student? How are you in the classroom? Are you curious? Are you, a whiz at this stuff? Are you, just the sort of lay of the land in terms of what academics looks like for you? And if you don't have that, that can be a hole. And honestly, a medical school could look at you and say, we're not gonna deal with this student anymore or this applicant any longer because they're not engaged in the process of learning. Apparently, they go to class, they do school, and then they leave.
Yep. Yeah, I think the easy answer to this is it depends on the medical school and the requirements that they have set for letters of recommendations. But in general, that won't work. And again, going back to what you mentioned, how how long have they been out of school, et cetera. It looks like they graduated in 2018 and are currently in a postbac. I'm assuming that's the same student. If that's the case, they still have an opportunity to get some letters from their postbac professors. So
yep.
That will definitely help.
Yep, absolutely. But again, the student has to initiate that. You can't depend on the professor initiating it.
Yeah. If I'm taking a gap year, should I ask for my letter of rec after I take the class or when I'm applying? Ooh, I like this answer. I'll start with this one. So I am a fan of setting expectations.
Yep.
The ideal is that you have a letter of recommendation that is dated the year that you are applying. So that you didn't take a class 5 years ago and the letter writer says, back in 2015, this student was great. 2016 now at this point. And so what you can do if you're not planning on applying that year that you're interacting with the professor is you let the professor know, hey, Professor Smith, I'm applying to medical school after my gap year. I would love to stay in touch with you throughout my gap year, let you know what I'm up to. Yep. I really enjoyed the class with you. Is it okay if I keep in touch with you? And when the time comes, ask for a letter of recommendation.
Absolutely.
Set that expectation.
Yep. Absolutely.
And they can say yes, no, maybe so, and go from there.
You know, and I think my experience is that most professors are going to be sure that sounds good. Just update me every now and then about what's going on and when you need stuff from me. And they're very I think most faculty members at universities and colleges are willing to work with students, and they have a desire to help out the student as much as they can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of students fear that they're the first student ever to ask for a letter of recommendation from this professor.
Right.
I think the assumption should be that they understand that this is a part of their job. This is not some weird request that you're making. You're the first person ever that's applying to medical school that they've interacted with. And it's just part of their job, and you're just the next student to ask.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I mean, so having not been a professor, but having been a manager of MCAT tutors for so long, that was part of my job too. When, losing my voice. Sometimes schools want all academics. Sometimes schools want a mix of academic and professional. And for the professional cases, I wrote a lot of letters. And yeah, I mean, there were definitely people who did multiple gap years and maybe only worked with me for a little bit. And the savvy ones were emailing me every 6 or 9 months, just, hey, Miss Rachel, I just wanted to tell you I'm out in Utah now and still thinking about med school next year. And, 3-line emails to make sure that I still had a face with the name in my brain.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I wrote a lot of letters. It goes with the gig.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Yes, it does.
All right, what's next?
Hello. So through a class at my university, I was assigned to shadow an attending neurosurgeon for 20 plus hours. However, he would only do the first cut and then let the residents do the rest of the surgery. And he'd go see other patients and leave me in the OR to watch the surgery. So would I also add the residents or just the attending physician for my shadowing? Gotta love attendings doing sketchy stuff. Anyway, the attending is who you shadowed. You don't shadow the residents.
Yeah.
So just keep that on the down low. The attending disappeared.
Yeah. I agree with that.
And just to expand on that, right? Because a lot of students ask, can I shadow a resident? Can I shadow a fellow? And technically, the kind of rule of thumb is you shadow attendings. That's who you want to be shadowing. You don't want to be shadowing just because kind of the idea behind the whole thing is you're understanding what a day in the life is like of a physician, what their duties are, what they're required to do, what they're doing when they're not seeing patients, etc. And a resident or fellow is someone who's in training. So it's like you're following them at school. And it's just on the kind of the outside looking in, it looks the same, but it's technically not.
Yeah, and I would say that it to add to that a little bit, I do think that You want people who know you well and who can really address. And so a good example of this back in, in the undergraduate experience is you're getting a letter of recommendation from a TA or a lab instructor, as opposed to the actual professor of the of record in the class. And you really want somebody who's going to know you well and stuff. And so, I think the experience with a resident or a fellow, if that's who you're shadowing, I think that's an issue that you need to kind of deal with in and of itself. But you need to talk about what that experience was like in your recognition that they are a fellow or they are a resident, and what that means about your experience with them, et cetera. Just stuff like that, so that when you get that letter of recommendation, they know that what's going on. But I definitely think that you have to know who you're shadowing and know what the situation is with that particular student or that particular physician, et cetera, so that you can illustrate well in your application that I shadowed a resident. I get it that they're a resident and that means certain things, and blah blah blah.
All right. Next up, will admissions committees look down on my upward trend with classes being online or hybrid? My upward trend started only one semester before the pandemic.
Wow.
It's no other choice, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think this is a day of reckoning for admissions committees to really do a deep look inside of themselves and try to overcome some of these biases that have taken hold for a long time, that online classes are horrible and too easy or whatever. So
right.
I think it'll be very interesting moving forward. But at the end of the day, for this student, there's no other choice unless you decide to go back to online, if it's online, or not online, if it's in person full time, and then just repeat all the same classes or take much more classes and more money to spend for all of that.
I agree with that, because the question here: will admissions committees look down on my upward trend with classes being online? So what if they do? What are you going to do about that? There's nothing you can do. You have to just put what you've done out there and let it stand on its own. I don't think that admissions committees are going to look down on it, particularly within the context of the pandemic. But some may be hard nosed and really continue to hold the line on that. My suspicion is that most of them are going to be pretty forgiving on online and hybrid stuff. So, but
I will add as a quick note on the MAP side of this question, we're working on trying to collect that data whenever it's been announced by schools, which not all schools are going to put out a firm policy, and it's very early days. So at some point we'll have 200 odd pieces of data, whether that's a no comment or we're okay with online now, and we'll upload it to MAPD. Hopefully that'll happen in the next, I don't know. What do you think, Ryan? 3-4 weeks?
Sure.
Soonish. But yeah, one thing that impressed me when I was doing some of the original research was that Hopkins, who has long said no to online, is now saying, we understand it's okay, and they've made it retroactive. So they're not just making it okay for people who took online during spring 2020 when it might not have been a choice. They're saying, if we say online is okay, then it's always okay. And will that be permanent, or is that just going to be until they get through the pandemic? I don't know. Right? And that's one school. It's just one school. It's just an anecdote. Yeah. But it was an impressive one to me, because they're have pretty firm policies.
Yeah.
Good
so I think we can be hopeful.
Yeah. It's always good to be hopeful.
It's hard these days. Next question here. I took all my prereqs in community college from 2011 to 2013, transferred and finished undergrad with a bio degree in 2016, have a good science GPA, and recently took the MCAT in 2020 and did okay. Would my prereqs considered expired, outdated since it's been 8 to 10 years? Should I contact each medical school to make sure I don't have to retake any of them? Yes.
Yeah. Short answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, they could be expired. Yes, you should reach out to schools. Technically, nothing expires, but medical schools may have a policy that they want newer stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest concern here, even if they don't officially say they expire or whatever, is that it's been 5 years since you've been in the classroom. Yeah. And that can be, problematic depending on what you do outside of the classroom, if you're working or whatever. But it's been 5 years since you've been in an academic setting, and schools may question, do you still, have the sort of understanding of the academic environment? Do you get, do you still have good grasp on study skills, on that kind of stuff. So I think that it's much more nuanced than just, okay, they expire after X number of years. And so I think that the medical schools, when they're looking at applicants, are going to want to see some recent coursework that shows that you're a good student.
Yep. Yes. Is there a big difference among 4-year college, senior college, and university? What? I don't know any of those differences.
Is there a big difference?
Senior college and university.
Well,
what is senior college?
As opposed to junior college.
Oh. No, there's not a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, those feel to me like somewhat out of date or like international terms.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel like we necessarily use that language very much anymore in American K through 20 education.
Yeah.
The general language around these parts is community college, right? Is even losing its cachet. And a lot of the junior colleges, community colleges, are now just being called colleges. And you don't really know that they're a junior college or a community college. And then usually the language here is there are colleges within the university.
Right.
And so there's Harvard University, and Harvard College is one of the colleges within Harvard University, and among other colleges. So it's a weird little language thing that we have here. But like the general term university, to consider anything kind of post-secondary.
Yeah.
So, interesting language. Senior college. Learning something new.
Yeah, there used to be, just as an aside, there used to be institutions that were senior only. They didn't enroll freshmen or sophomores. They only enrolled juniors and seniors, and then had graduate
probably
work.
That language that he's
it's a holdover from that. That's very unusual these days.
Yeah.
Would not be typical.
Well, it's because they realize that they can make money all 4 years instead.
Right,
of
exactly. Golly, Ryan, you're gonna tear tonight.
And senior college is different than seniors college, right? And that's where you go to school, Scott, is seniors college.
I cannot believe you just said that. I cannot believe. I'm out of here.
Ageism.
That's not ageism.
Oh, yes, it is.
One, he's not a senior.
That's right.
Two, they call them adult learning institutions.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Rachel, for having my back.
Okay. I was feeling snappy. I had to show my snaps. Here's a good question. Is a committee letter preferred more than personal letters?
So the short answer to this is, if your institution does a committee letter, do the committee letter. And if your institution doesn't, then you do the individual letters. But if you have a committee at your school, then do it. Do whatever they ask you to do.
Yeah. And the longer answer is if you have some sort of conflict with your committee, if there's something else, you can go get personal letters, and then potentially you may have to explain why you didn't get a committee letter.
Mm-hmm. Or they may, the medical school, I've seen it before. The med school calls up the undergrad institution and says, why didn't this student have a committee letter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I have heard some students, I haven't heard this from advisors, but I've heard some students say that their schools limit committee letters to certain stats.
Yep.
So, if you're someone who has a great upward trend, but not a stellar CUME, there might be some instances where maybe you don't qualify for the committee letter.
Right.
And yeah, I wouldn't say that's the end of the world. It's just, it's.
I think that's what it is. Right.
I mean, and Dr. Wright, I love the way you often put things in the frame of optimal, acceptable.
Yeah.
Not acceptable.
Right.
Optimal is committee letter, but.
Yeah. Yeah. But acceptable is individual letters.
Yep.
Okay. So a follow-up from our person who is asking about the different post-secondary institutions. The root of that question is, so is it okay to do prerequisites in any of those institutions?
So this is a more complicated answer than I think you would want it to be necessarily, but it depends. It depends on your situation. It depends on, I think that optimally, you would do it do your prerequisites at the institution where you're going to get your degree. Now, if there are students who do community college first and then transition from community college onto the university setting, and that's acceptable and stuff. But again, the community college, all of these levels of institutions are accredited. As long as the institution is accredited, then you're safe that the courses are going to be acceptable and are going to work. Now, whether or not that's going to be the optimal setting for you to take any or all of those classes in depends a little bit on a little bit deeper work in terms of understanding your story, and you have to do well at all levels of your institutions that you're going to, et cetera. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but on face value, yes, you can do those anywhere and they'll meet the prerequisites. I hope I didn't confuse the person with all that.
Nah.
Whoever you are, I'm sorry if I confused you.
All right, we've got one that I can't put up because it's the person's name is showing. Yeah, you want to read it?
Yeah. Is it okay to talk about research in my personal statement, especially since I want to continue that in medical school? How detailed should I be? So,
wow.
I'll lead this one since I wrote the book on it, and then Scott, you can give me your thoughts since you don't have to always agree with me. In my mind, the personal statement is, why do you want to be a physician? Not what do you want to do as a physician, which this question is kind of leaning towards, of saying, I want to continue research in medical school and likely beyond. In my mind, when a student focuses on research in their personal statement, that probably tells me that they're lacking clinical experience. Or they're trying to highlight research because they think it's the best thing in the world and better than everyone else, and they want to do research later on. In my mind, it's a distraction from the personal statement. The goal, again, of the personal statement is, why do you want to be a physician? And research, you don't have to do research to be an amazing physician. You don't have to do research in medical school, in residency, etc., to be an amazing physician. If you want to do research, great, but that, in my mind, doesn't need to be in the personal statement, and that's what your extracurricular activities are for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Generally, I don't think it's bad necessarily to mention it in your personal statement as a part of the personal statement, as a part of the, for example, the questionnaire doesn't really talk about whether it's basic science research or clinical or some sort of translational research that they're doing or whatever. They don't really go down that road, but so in my view, it would depend a little bit on what they're doing, what kind of research it is, and how it relates back to why they want to be a doctor. And if there's a storyline there that makes sense, that really perpetuates these notions of, I want to be a doctor because I want to do X, Y, and Z, and because the bigger picture is ABC or whatever. If that fits together with the research part, then I think it's acceptable. But I agree with Ryan that the largest part of your personal statement really has to be focused on clinical medicine and why you want to be a physician. If it's all about research, then you really want to examine more about, should you be applying MD PhD, or should you be going down just the PhD route in and of itself. But I agree that it's the activities descriptions is where you want to put most of those most of the information about the research that you're doing.
Nope. When evaluating professors for my letters of recommendation, should I take into considering where they received their degree from?
No.
Nope. No, it's a very common question that a lot of students will chase a letter from someone who has a name, someone who's from that prestigious institute, versus someone who knows you better. And always, always, always go for someone who knows you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we'll write you a very strong recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah.
They may know you and hate you. Don't go for them.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want that.
You don't want that.
That's very rare. I mean, I could count probably on one hand the number of times I've seen a letter that was just a really very
vindictive.
Yeah. If you're going to do that, then you need to go back to the student and say, I cannot, in good conscience, write you a letter, and you probably should ask somebody else.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I've done that. I've advised people to consider not asking me. Like, are you sure you want? I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
But there's a saying, and I don't know, maybe there's a more polite way to say it, but damning with faint praise. And Scott, I know you've said that it's almost like a bell curve. Like the majority of them are fine. They're just fine. They're not amazing or weak. And, we already talked this hour about sometimes it's hard to really form a relationship with that professor. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's as good as it can be because it's as well as they know you. But if you've got the choice between someone who knows you really well and thinks you're amazing, but went to Ohio State like I did, or someone from Harvard who doesn't seem to like you much, I mean, I might be biased, but I would say you're picking me, pick the strong recommender, pick the person who can communicate well and will communicate positively about you.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with that.
Looks like we got time for one more.
Yeah. This is a pretty easy one. Are there any public DO schools? Yes, there are 7, according to the Choose DO Explorer.
Mm-hmm. 2 in my state.
Yeah. You got Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine, Ohio University Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine, Oklahoma State University College of Osteopathic Medicine, Rowan in New Jersey, Sam Houston State, which is one of the new ones in Texas. UNT, which is one of the other new ones in Texas, and West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine, all public. Yep. And those 2 in Texas are applications through TMDSAS.
That's correct.
Not AAMC.
That's correct.
And Incarnate Word
is private.
Word.
And goes through AAMC.
Word.
Incarnate Word.
Goes through AAMC.
Yep.
To add to the confusion.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. All right. Another awesome episode in the books.
Woohoo.
Thank you all for being here. Go play with Mapped and the new application features in there. Again, just the beginning of those as we add more to that. This week, we're doing a little mini push to get more data that we can give you feedback on. So stay tuned for that as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Any other parting words of wisdom? Go Dogs. No, go Gators. Get out of here.
Go. What is Go Dogs?
University of Georgia.
Are we talking basketball now, or what are we talking about?
No, it's just someone that throws a little jab in there for some reason. 'Cause I have my Gator stuff in the background.
Oh,
It's
okay.
They're allowed to be wrong.
I'm
It's
like,
okay.
I'm totally confused here.
The rivalry never ends. It's always available for a jab.
Well, anytime anybody wants to debate Star Trek versus Stargate,
There.
I'm all in.
Oh Lord.
Nerd alert.
Yeah. On that note,
We love you, everyone.
Good
Bye.
night.